morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. We will begin our morning today, as we always do, with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrast, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ. Amen, and so it is. All right, our quotes. The first one is from a woman named Barbara Marciniak. She says, everything changes when you start to emit your own frequency rather than absorbing the frequencies around you. When you start imprinting your intent on the universe rather than receiving an imprint from existence. Okay? Next, self-control is strength. Right thought is mastery. Calmness is power. Next, life is a balance between what we can control and what we cannot. I am learning to live between effort and surrender. Danielle Ortner. Okay, so let me stop right here and let's expand on this quote just a minute. So what do we know we can control? Only ourselves, right? So that's where we should be putting all our effort on ourselves, which is what we can control, and approach the rest, everything we can't control, with an attitude of surrender. Okay, next quote. We either make ourselves miserable or we make ourselves stronger. The amount of work is the same. Carlos Castaneda. Okay, this next one is one of my all-time favorites. There is only one perpetrator of evil on the planet, human unconsciousness. That realization is true forgiveness. With forgiveness, your victim identity dissolves and your true power emerges, the power of presence. Instead of blaming the darkness, you bring the light. Eckhart Tolle for the win on that one. That's one of my favorite quotes. Okay, so yes, wow, that is a powerful, powerful statement. It's not people or even a specific person who is evil, but their unconsciousness or their unconscious behavior that produces what we would consider evil actions. Once you understand that, it's much easier to have compassion for them and then to forgive their behavior, which frees you from being their victim. Okay, last one. I promise if you keep searching for everything beautiful in this world, you will eventually become beautiful. Tyler Kent White. Why? Because what you become what you focus on and give your attention to. So if you're always focusing on beauty and beautiful things, that's what you will manifest in your life. Okay, so today is week 3 of our series on the chakras and the chakra system, which just by way of review is simply a way of defining and describing the various centers of energy we have as humans. 2 weeks ago, we talked about our root chakra, which is the first one. It's where all the energy that surrounds our physical security and survival are. It has to do with how safe we feel in the world and in our lives. Its color is red. Its element is earth. The statement it makes is, I exist. And the affirmation we chose to associate with it and to use to strengthen it is, I am grounded, I am safe, I am divinely protected at all times. Then last week, we talked about our sacral chakra, which is connected to our creativity and our ability to create. Its color is orange. It's represented by the element of water. It makes the statement, I create. And the affirmation we chose to work with and strengthen it is, I create peace. And we ended last week with a meditation called the Dove of Peace meditation. But you can create anything. We, of course, it's not limited to creating peace. That's just what we chose to focus on last week, largely because our theme for the year here is pursuing peace. We also talked about the difference between creating and reproducing, and how we need to learn to be good parents to our creations, which is achieved by consciously creating versus unconsciously creating. We're going to create no matter what, because it's our nature to create. That's what we were born to do. But it is our choice whether we create consciously and on purpose, or unconsciously by default with all the subconscious programs that are running in the background of our mind. And as one of our quotes today reminds us, unconsciousness and unconscious behavior is what creates or opens up the door for evil. So it's in everyone's best interest for all of us as much as possible to create consciously. Today we're going to talk about the third chakra, which is the solar plexus, and it is associated with power, with our personal power, which many of our quotes today dealt with, the subject of power. A lot of times when you're working out with a trainer or you're watching a fitness video, they'll refer to something called your core strength, and that's the strength that comes from the center of your body. Physically, the solar plexus chakra is located in your abdomen right below your belly button. It's that part of you that engages when you do a sit-up, or in yoga when you're holding the plank position. That's your solar plexus. And energetically, it's the seat of your emotional power. It's also, incidentally, where what we call gut feelings come from. Its color is yellow, and I really don't wear a lot of yellow clothing. There's a tad of little yellow in this shirt. That's all I could find in my closet. But its color is yellow, and its element is fire. And if you've ever done a lot of sit-ups, or if you've ever held a plank position for an extended period of time, you'll understand that connection, because it feels like that part of your body is on fire. We also think of fire as something that's powerful. Okay, that's another reason it's associated with fire. It can provide power positively, to cook our food, to heat our homes, to melt things that need to be melted, to harden things that need to be hardened, like clay pots in a kiln. It burns things that need to be burned, or it can also be a powerful force of destruction, as in a house fire or a wildfire. Either way, it is a transformative force. It changes things from one state to another. So that's obviously in the literal sense, but we're going to talk today about power in the energetic sense, specifically what we call our personal power and how we use it to transform our lives. And we're going to talk about it in three parts. Part one will be what power is and what it's not. Part two will be the ways in which we give our power away at times. And then part three will be how to get our power back when we've given it away and then maintain it. And I feel like I need to make a disclaimer before I get started, because I have such a strong mothering instinct and aspect to me. When I bring you these teachings, I pretty much always want it to feel like I'm putting a warm blanket over you with kisses and hugs and snuggles. Like most mothers, I'm always concerned when I feel like my kids aren't happy or when they're in pain. I want to comfort them and fix what I can to make them feel better. But there's another side to mothering that's not nearly so much fun, but it's just as necessary. And that is the ability to dispense at times what's known as tough love, where you have to tell your kids things they don't necessarily want to hear or that they might not agree with. So some things I'm going to say today might fall into that category, and you may find yourself disagreeing with me, and that is perfectly okay. I don't claim to have the answers to all of life's questions or the solutions to every problem. And the way I approach things is exactly that, the way I approach them. And I'm not even saying it's the right approach, but it's the approach I found that works for me. And I can only speak to you from my personal experience, so I'm going to do what I always encourage all of you to do, which is speak my truth from my heart. I'm a firm believer that everyone needs to approach things the way that works best for them. And because we're all different, the ways that work best for us are not all the same. But there are some general principles that hold true no matter what. And we'll talk about some of those as well today. I've said a couple of times now, your faith, your belief system is not really for when things are going well, but for storms. When stormy situations arise, our beliefs get tested, and we get the chance to see how good or how effective they are or are not, as the case may be. And I don't know about anybody else, but in the process of rethinking my beliefs, which should be an ongoing process with all of us, I found myself agreeing with, or at least listening to, and trying to understand people who I never thought I would listen to or give any credence to anything they said or defend anything that came out of their mouth. And that's a really strange feeling to have, especially if you're a person who's had very strong beliefs and opinions in the past about certain issues and people like I have. So when we get to that particular part of the teaching, I'll mention it again. But if you find yourself completely disagreeing with something I say today, please know it's okay. I still love you. Hope you still love me. So, power, part 1, what it is and what it's not. I forget the exact words I put into the search engine when I first started studying this, but a video came up on YouTube that was called Active versus Reactive versus Apparent Power. And I thought, yes, this is exactly the subject I want to find out more about. And I was all prepared for a deep philosophical discussion, and I hit play only to find it was actually a video about literal electrical power. It was kind of a tutorial for people who were studying electrical engineering. And they were talking about AC and DC and voltage and et cetera. And it involved lots of mathematical equations. But something told me to keep watching, so I did. And I actually got a pretty good analogy out of it that does deal with the kind of power I'm talking about. And so that's what I'm going to talk about right now. So the main points about the subject of power I got from this video are the following. The first thing it showed was a little diagram that had a power source at one end, and it showed a line or a wire that the current was running along, and they described two kinds of power, positive and negative. Now, this isn't a moral judgment like I talked about earlier with fire being able to create a positive or a negative outcome. In this context, no one is judging the power as good or bad. Positive and negative are only referring to which direction the power is moving along the wire. If it's flowing forward through the wire or tube or whatever the conducting material is, it's considered positive. And if it changes direction and starts moving backwards toward the source, or it alternates between moving forward and backwards, like a pendulum, it's considered negative power. And here's the interesting part about that. Remember when I was talking about our beliefs being tested? One of the ways we test our beliefs is by determining how effective they are. Do they work? Do they accomplish the purpose they were intended to? So keep that in mind when I give you this next piece. The next thing they talked about is active power, and that's when the current is positive, it's moving forward, and the voltage and the current are in sync with each other or in harmony. And they showed a graph with these two waves moving at the same rate of speed. This is what is known as active power. Here are the properties of active power. It's always positive, never negative. It never changes direction. It only moves forward. Side note, when the power goes back toward the source, thus being negative, and you come into contact with that power, what happens? You get shocked. So when your power, your personal power, starts flowing in the wrong direction and becomes negative power, that's when we get hurt. So see, I told you it was relevant. I'm glad I kept watching it. So then they talked about reactive power. And for the purposes of our teaching today and our analogy here, we'll think of reactive power as when you react rather than respond, as we've talked about many times. This is what happens when you're constantly reacting to the conditions around you rather than creating the conditions yourself, like we talked about last week. Reactive power would be on that level when you feel things are happening to you and you're a victim of circumstance. So they put the same graph up as they did before of the two waves, but this time the lines of voltage and current aren't moving together in harmony at all. He refers to them as distorted and out of sync because they're not moving at the same rate of speed. One is significantly ahead of the other. Symbolically, I see that as your reaction. When you react, you just spew out the first thing that comes to your mind with no filter, with no critical thinking, with no self-control. You just react. Boom. What does that create? Reactive energy. And here are its properties. When the energy is in a positive cycle, it is stored in something called a capacitor. But when it then goes negative, when it changes direction and becomes reactive, it loses all its stored energy and becomes useless and ineffective. It is power that only goes back and forth between positive and negative and accomplishes no useful work. Basically, it gets caught in a loop and never moves forward to the place it's intending to be providing power to. Interesting. So what do we learn from that? Reacting never moves you forward, and it never gives you the power to get where you want to go. Now, the next thing they mentioned that I found significant is that one cannot be converted into the other. They are separate quantities and are always treated as such. So in other words, you can't have active power and reactive power in the same line at the same time. It's either one or the other. If you want to get anything, and if you want to get anything done, you've got to be working with that active power. So in terms of accomplishing your goal and being effective, you've got to be working with that active, positive, forward-only moving power. Reactive power that goes back and forth between positive and negative and changes direction cannot exist in the same space as active power. Okay, that reminds me of the scripture, what? A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. He's just turning around in circles. Okay, so that's going to be important for later on. The third kind of power that was discussed in this video is called apparent power. And to be honest, it was the most complicated and involved the most math, and I didn't fully understand it like I did the other two. So I have no direct analogy to draw here. But what I do have are some images that I want to put in your mind that beautifully illustrate what I believe the difference is between apparent power, like it's a, you think it's power, it looks like power, and actual or true power. Now, the first time I presented this teaching, I had actual photos that we put up on a screen that I don't have today. So I'll just describe them to you. Photo number 1 was of a young man who was placing a flower in the barrel of a soldier's rifle in what was most definitely some sort of peace march protesting war. It doesn't matter which war specifically or what country. The idea is the same, that love and kindness and diplomacy should replace violence and physical force. So that was one image of apparent power versus true power. Here in the United States in the 60s and 70s, they referred to it as flower power, which was a movement to end the war in Vietnam and replace it with more peaceful ways of settling disputes. Photo number 2 is of a man standing in front of a line of military tanks. And this was not related to one country's war with another country, but rather a country trying to control and suppress the voices of its own people. In 1989, some students in China began a pro-democracy protest wanting freedom from the rule of the Communist Party. And after several months, the government sent in tanks to try to get them to dissipate and basically give up. They ended up killing several hundred of them, accomplishing their purpose, which was to disperse the crowd and end the protest. But then one lone man decided to take a stand, and as the tanks were leaving Tiananmen Square, he just stood right in front of them, and where this had taken place. So he repeatedly, it was on video, and he repeatedly would just move and in front of them where if they were going to leave, they were going to have to just run right over him. And he knew the cameras were on him, and he knew how bad that would look, so they wouldn't do it. And so this incident was filmed and smuggled out of China to a worldwide audience. And it really did change the tide of some things. Internationally, it is considered to be one of the most iconic images of all time. So the last photo is of a beautiful African-American woman at a Black Lives Matter protest, unarmed, wearing a delicate little sundressed, refusing to move as multiple police officers in full riot gear are rushing toward her. So these three photos demonstrate the difference, I think, between apparent power that we often perceive to be physical strength or military might, also known as the side with the most and the biggest guns, as opposed to true power, which is the courage to stand up to people or forces who you believe to either be harming you or your fellow man, or denying you or your fellow man your rights or your freedom in some capacity. And to stand up for what you believe the truth to be, for what you believe is right, even when you are very obviously outgunned and outnumbered. The biblical story of David and Goliath is what comes to mind here. This kind of courage and power is the result of a very healthy solar plexus chakra. This is Rosa Parks on the bus kind of power. Jesus remaining silent before Pilate kind of power. Not force backed up by violence and weapons, but true, genuine inner power fueled by complete self-mastery, specifically over your own fear, which we'll discuss as well a little later. For way too long now, the entire world has been engulfed in and controlled by this type of brute force where might makes right rather than operating with and in true, genuine power. All right, so that was part one, what power is and what it's not. Now I want to talk about the ways we give our power away. We're born with power. I mean, think about it. It's a paradox because on the one hand, there's nothing more helpless and vulnerable than an infant. A newborn baby is completely dependent upon its caretakers in every way. But all that baby has to do is cry. And look, mama and daddy, auntie, uncle, brothers and sisters, grandma and grandpa, all come running immediately to find out what it is the baby needs and gets it for them. Now that is power. When you can just, and everybody comes running. So obviously I'm talking about in a normal, healthy, loving family setting. I understand that there is abuse and all that, but ideally, a baby in a family commands the attention and assistance of everyone around it. So my point is, we're born with power, but as we grow up, we start learning to give it away and use it as a bargaining chip in the emotional negotiations and manipulations we engage in order to get what we want or what we think we need from others. Now, what I'm about to say is one of the things that some of you might disagree with, but again, it's just my perspective, my experience, and my approach. Eat what you can and throw what you can't eat away. Little side note here. I originally gave this teaching several years back when Donald Trump was still the president, which obviously is no longer the case. But the point and the illustration about giving away your power is still a good one, so I'm going to use it. And you can insert any name here you want. He's just my example, which, though, I never in a million years thought I would ever be defending or saying the slightest positive thing about Donald Trump. But just let me say this. It's so tiresome. And at the time, I had become so tired of people on social media blaming that man for everything evil that's ever happened, and so weary with people just waiting to pounce on and make fun of every misspoken word that came out of his mouth, which there was no shortage of. I'm well aware of that. But doing that only gives it did at the time, and whoever we replaced him with, we're still dealing with his issues now as a country. But even, I don't care if you want to put Putin in there, the CDC, whoever you think is the arbiter of evil, it really doesn't do any good only to just constantly lay blame, all right? Because that is reactive, negative energy that we're spewing on whoever. We are wasting the precious time that could be better spent coming up with solutions, sitting on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram ranting about this person didn't do this right and they lied and this is wrong and he's a racist and an idiot, blah, 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 blah. Vomit, vomit, vomit. And the level of outrage and anger, not only at him, but at each other and anyone who's on the other side of things from you just gets higher and higher, and the insults we hurl at each other just get nastier and nastier. And the atmosphere in this country is now so toxic that there are many families who don't even celebrate the holidays together anymore because of it. Now, unfortunately, several years later, even with a new president, that's still the case. Things are still pretty toxic in this country. And I freely admit that I was guilty of being a part of that. I raised my hand. I have made some of those very statements, both publicly and privately, about him in particular. I've unfriended people on Facebook just because of their ardent support of him. I've laughed at the jokes. I've forwarded the memes. I have been a participant, so I'm not just pointing my finger at you. But guess what? In this country, as well as around the whole world right now, we are up against challenges that are so big, so major, so pressing and urgent that we no longer have the luxury of giving our inner power away to anyone, because we're going to need every bit of it to deal with what we're facing and come out the other side of it having created a brand new world. Now, if we're really creating a brand new world, if we're giving birth, guess what? Giving birth takes strength and energy. And so in my opinion, we don't need to be giving any of that strength and energy away on blame. We need to be using it, building and creating something new and better. Blaming is only weakening us and putting our energy in the wrong place. Even if he or anybody else is guilty of everything everyone has ever said about them, even if they really are the worst evil villain there is or ever has been in real life or a movie, blaming them, number one, does nothing to move us forward, and number two, does nothing but put us in victim mode, because it gives away every bit of our power, even what's been stored in our virtual capacitor. Remember the analogy we were talking about earlier? Once energy becomes reactive and negative, and the current and voltage fall into disharmony and get out of sync, and it starts traveling backwards instead of forwards, then what happens? Not only does the energy become useless and ineffective, all the positive energy that was stored up for future use is lost. So then I told this story, and again, remember, this is a couple of years ago, so I'm not talking about just a few days, but I really did this a few years ago. I said, I have about 1,400 friends on Facebook. I've been conducting a little experiment over the past few days. There's a feature on Facebook where you can snooze a person for 30 days, which means that although you remain friends with them, you don't see anything from them for a period of 30 days. So I finally got tired of all the arguing and bickering that I snoozed every friend of mine who put up any post that was openly derogatory of the president or the government, or was hostile towards anybody else, or assigning blame to any person or any situation that was just generally fearful or bad news. So there's no way to tell for sure, because I think Facebook uses algorithms that limit the number of people you interact with anyway. But as far as I could tell, when I did that, out of the 1,400 friends, I started seeing posts after I had snoozed everybody that was really negative. I was only seeing posts from about 100 people out of 1,400. So that'll show you how prevalent it was, and to some degree still is. And when I put a post up explaining what I had done, I got some backlash from people reminding me that it was Donald Trump's irresponsibility during COVID that cost people their lives, and didn't I know this, and don't I know that? And yes, I get it. People were frustrated and still are. People were hurting and still are. People were scared and still are. People were not sure what to do and still are not. But I still maintain that the extreme of blaming one man or even one institution for all of that, and then refusing to listen to anything that person has to say as a matter of course, is just as bad as the other extreme of people who say they would still support him if he shot someone in Times Square, or the people, bless their hearts, who were ignorant enough to actually swallow bleach or Lysol just because they think that's what they heard him say. I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say this. I'm not sure that we can blame that level of stupid on any leader, not even him. I think these people were doomed to meet an early demise with or without Donald Trump. So does that absolve him, or again, anybody you want to fill in the blank, from saying things that might possibly be misconstrued by feeble-minded people, especially given his level of his position of authority? No. But does 100,000 of us jumping on Facebook to voice our disapproval and outrage and yelling at his defenders change any of this at this point? No. It just keeps adding to the toxic environment and dividing us more and more. Both of these extremes are the result of negative, backwards flowing, reactive energy and are not useful and are completely unhelpful. The blame game is never ending and leads us into a victim mentality that says, I can't create the life I want because fill in the blank, whoever you want to put in there. Doesn't matter whose name you fill in that blank. When you blame anyone, you are giving your power away. And we've got to stop giving away our personal power through blaming others. Remember, one of our quotes from last week was, instant freedom is achieved when you realize you don't need one person on earth to be even a little bit different in order for you to feel the way you want to feel. So, blaming others is a major way we give away our power. The second way I'm going to talk about today that we give our power away is through fear. And I realize this is also a touchy subject because, as I said earlier, so many people are afraid right now. The future is still a little uncertain. And I know there are a lot of good, wise, loving people out there, even spiritual teachers and leaders, some of whom I'm personally close to and who I love, who are saying it's okay if you're afraid right now. It's normal. It's human. And I agree. It is. I'm not judging anyone for being afraid. All I'm saying is fear is another way, another classic way in which we give away our power, and that it's a choice that we make. We've talked about fear many times, and we all know how debilitating it is and how it even weakens our physical immune system. Again, I'll give you a personal example. As I've mentioned before, I have battled fear in one form or another for most of my life. In the past, I've bordered on being a full-on hypochondriac. And one thing I've learned in dealing with my own fear is that for me, and this isn't true for everyone, but it is for me, and I told you at the beginning of this teaching, I was going to speak from my heart about what works for me. So for me, fear is like alcohol to an alcoholic. Many people can drink casually, can drink socially because they know their limit, and they have no trouble stopping at their limit when they reach it. That's the case with me when it comes to alcohol. I enjoy a glass of wine every now and then, but I also know my limit is 2 because after that I'm just going to fall asleep anyway. I've never had an issue stopping drinking alcohol when I should. I've never had a desire to overindulge. But when it comes to fear, as I said earlier, I have learned enough about myself to know I can't play with it. If I let even a little of it in, I know I will shortly be spiraling completely out of control in the same way some people can't even have one drink because they know if they do, they will not be able to stop. So let's go back now to the electrical power that we were talking about a few minutes ago. I'm going to quickly reread the last part. They were talking about active and reactive power and said that one cannot be converted into another. They are separate quantities and must always be treated as such. So in other words, you can't have active power and reactive power in the same line at the same time. It's either one or the other, and if you want to get anything done, you're going to have to be working with active power. So in terms of accomplishing your goal and being effective, you've got to be working with that active, positive, forward-only moving power. Reactive power that goes back and forth between positive and negative and changes direction cannot exist in the same space as that active power. You must choose one or the other. One is effective and the other is not, but it's a choice. Back to me personally now. For me, the best and most effective way to deal with things right now is not to give any of my power away to fear, because for me, fear and trust cannot exist in the same space at the same time. Perhaps other people have figured out a way for both to coexist within them, but I have not. And just as I don't judge anyone who's saying it's okay and normal and human to be afraid, I would hope no one would judge me for choosing not to allow fear in my space right now. Exactly the same way alcoholics should not judge people who choose to casually drink, and people who are not alcoholics should not judge people who choose not to drink at all because they figured out that's what's best for them. And that's the key, and brings us to part 3, learning how to get our power back when we've lost it and then maintain it. The way we do this is through not judging others and choosing to practice and to show unconditional love to everyone. I'm going to read one more short piece and then I'll be done. It's by Amanda Ellis, the same woman who wrote the Dove of Peace meditation that we ended with last week. And she's talking here about unconditional love. Unconditional love is the love that holds the answers to all. It's the love that can stop you in your tracks, command you to yield into a soft yet strong embrace, and wrap you in an energy of perfect peace, stillness, and support. This is love at its most powerful, its most urgent, and its most felt. None can ignore this call back to love, for it is the natural state from where you came. It is who you are in essence, and that to which you will return. We have all forgotten the true might of love when it is most pure, untainted by greed, sacrifice, judgment, or demand. We play out conditional love in our relationships here on earth, seeing the imperfect in another and judging it. Yet true unconditional love is within us all, even in the one we judge so harshly. If we could only focus on the unconditional love in one another and see that seed grow, it would cancel out the growth of negativity, blame, and disharmony. For energy goes where it's directed. Wow, that's a powerful truth. In my opinion, we're spending way too much of our time giving our power away by screaming at each other on social media and face to face, blaming others for what we perceive to be their shortcomings. So what did this just say? Energy goes where it's directed. Don't you want to see something else on TV other than bad news all the time? Don't you want to talk about something else except everything that's wrong in the world? Don't you want to at least take a break from living in fear? I know I do. So who's stopping you? It's your choice. People make fun of me and even chide me for not watching the news, but that's my choice. That's what's best for me. Remember, non-judgment and unconditional love are the keys to keeping and maintaining your personal power. I won't judge you for watching the news, and I hope you will not judge me for choosing not to. And that's coming from someone who used to be a complete and total news junkie. All right, back to Amanda now. If you direct your energy into pure love, then you'll receive pure love. If you direct it into blame, you'll only receive more things to judge. Unconditional love is within all things in this great universe that was made from its divine sparks of radiance and perfection. It is the way shower that reminds us that all is well and nothing is lost. To those who wrong you, those who fight you, those who misunderstand you, your greatest weapon is not force or retribution, but love, love, love. Unconditional love steadies the heart, nourishes the soul, and cares for all your wounds and battle scars. Nothing is stronger than unconditional love. So remember, we're talking today about what true power is. And she's saying here that true power is being able to tap into that unconditional love that all of us have. Unconditional love, she says, shows compassion where it is needed, gives strength when times are tough, and provides comfort to all who seek it. Unconditional love is not weak, but the greatest force in this universe. So, thank you, Miss Amanda. You know, we don't have to continue giving our power away by blaming others for everything that's going wrong in our lives and in the world. We don't have to live with these rigid either or propositions where all we do is fight with each other and demand everyone choose a side. Instead, as I just said, we can choose to practice unconditional love, the demonstration of which is to do what we need to do, what works for us, while still respecting those who are making different choices than we make. We can acknowledge that everyone around us is doing the best they can with the information they have on the level of consciousness they're currently on. We can make different choices from each other and still be a supportive community. So this week, let's focus on staying in our personal power the best way we know how and allow others to do the same. And most importantly, to stay in the energy of unconditional love, because that's where true power comes from. Here's our affirmation for the solar plexus chakra. It's a little longer than the previous ones. It says, I know my truth and I express myself authentically at all times. It is good for me to be my most powerful self. Being fully powerful and expressive in my truth is my natural state. I now embrace my full divine power to create a fulfilling life. And don't let anyone stop you from doing that. Amen? Amen. Thank you so much for being with me today. Join us again tomorrow night at 6:30 for our continuing study series on Eckhart Tolle's New Earth. And then please remember, importantly, that on Sunday, we will not be having a service on the campus physically. Everything will be virtual this 5th Sunday, and then we will see you again in person the following Sunday. Have a great week. I love you. Be at peace.